Before we begin, I'd just like to say thank you for watching my videos. If you are new to the channel, please consider becoming a patron. Just click the link in the video description below to be taken to my Patreon page. It's a great way to help support my channel and gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content and uncensored videos. Now, please relax and enjoy the creepy stories. Sometime in the early 80s, when I was about 12, I had what I can only describe as an unsettling incident. My bedroom was upstairs, and I had bookshelves mounted to the wall. Along with my books, I also had various toys and model ships and airplanes displayed there. I had 3 12-inch sized dolls, 2 classic G.I. Joe dolls from the 60s that had belonged to my older brothers, and my own $6 million man that I'd gotten as a little kid. I had 3 of them posed on the shelf, the G.I. Joes in military gear, and Steve Austin in the classic red jogging suit. One sunny Southern California afternoon, I was downstairs when I heard an unbelievably loud crash coming from upstairs. A crash which sounded, I kid you negative, like grown men falling on the floor. I ran upstairs, thinking there might have been a minor earthquake that I just didn't feel because I'd been walking at the time, and I anticipated seeing my big jar of pennies laying on the floor. When I got to my room, the penny jar, easily the heaviest thing in my room, and the only object that I could imagine would have made such a loud thumping sound if it fell, was safely on the bookshelf. However, all 3 dolls were laying on the floor, and not just that, but the limbs of all 3 were twisted in grotesque angles, which should have been impossible if they'd just fallen due to a minor temblor. One of the G.I. Joe's heads was completely turned backwards. My imagination frantically told me it looked almost like the dolls had been in some kind of fight, then fell to their deaths. I boxed up the dolls after that. Steve Austin was given away sometime later, and I gave the old G.I. Joes back to my older brother, who still has them to this day. This story takes place a few years back. I was 16, and my cousin who was with me was 21 at the time. We'll call him Jay. We're rural town boys. Jay and I grew up together, so we were very close. We always did everything together. One night, he decided to stay at my house with me while my parents were out of town. We didn't really do much, made some food, played some video games, etc. It wasn't long before we got kind of bored. In the past, Jay and I had gone for night walks just around the neighborhood, and we would just walk around and talk about stuff, things that were bothering us, girls, whatever really came up. That particular night, Jay had suggested that we go for a night walk. He had a lot on his mind at the time, as did I, so this walk was going to be a little longer than the usual ones. I live about 2 miles from our old middle school. We had decided that we wanted to roam over there just to hang out, take a trip down memory lane, and talk about our different times spent there. When we got there, we looked at the building through the chain-link fence for a while. We sat there pointing at stuff and telling each other stories for about half an hour. By this point, it was about 12:40 a.m. Jay had suggested that we hop the fence and sit down at the Ramada, a roofed shelter that was closer to the school building, but not quite close enough to the cameras that were attached to the building. I agreed with this idea as I wasn't really tired and still had more things on my mind to talk about. I remember walking over to the Ramada and seeing from a distance that the only camera facing the gym building had been broken and was hanging down, pointing at the ground, which I thought might have been caused by kids playing wall ball and accidentally throwing the ball too high on occasion, so I didn't think too much of it. Jay and I sat there and talked for a while, and I realized it was already 2 a.m. I was just about to say to him that we should probably head back when we heard the loud metal door of the gym suddenly open. There were windows in the doors for the gym, and there had been no lights on in there at any point, so it was pitch black the whole time we were there. We ducked down and peeked over the wall to see who was coming. The school had lights all around the building, but the Ramada did not. So we could see him very well, and we were hoping and thinking that he couldn't see us. The man that walked out didn't look like anyone we recognized in our times there, nor did he look like he even belonged there at all. He was a very dirty, ragged-looking man. Long hair, probably about shoulder length, and he was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. We tried as hard as we could to not move or make any noise as we watched this man walk out, look up at the sky, take a deep breath, and then walk behind the school's tool shed, which was about 15 feet to the left of the door he came out of. Upon getting behind there, he let out a sound I can only describe as a growl, and then we heard a loud bang, almost as if he punched the back of the shed. Jay and I gave each other a WTF look before whispering to each other that we needed to hop a different fence to get out because he would see us jumping the one we had jumped to get in. We looked back, and he was already back by the gym door. We crouch-walked out of the Ramada and a little ways out before we decided to stand up and make a mad dash to a way farther out fence. When we got to the fence, we looked back and didn't see the man anymore. Jay hopped the fence, and as I was climbing up, I heard him say, "Oh crap, hurry up," as he jumped onto the fence and grabbed my jacket to tug me upwards. When I got up top and was dropping down to the other side, I looked back to see the man had circled around and was only a few yards away from us, with something in his hand. My skin started crawling. I was sure he was holding a hammer. He had stopped when I got over the fence and was just staring at us. But then, as we started to jog away, we looked back and saw him sprint to the fence and hop it a lot faster than we did. Upon seeing this, we began to sprint as fast as we could until we got to my house. We had taken a longer way with more turns and had lost him very early on. We made sure everything was locked in the house, grabbed one of my dad's guns and the 2 dogs, and slept in my room. Nothing happened that night, so we did lose him for sure. We never did find out who was there or why, but we never went there on a night walk ever again. That's for sure. Alright, so I listen to a lot of scary stories on YouTube when I'm trying to fall asleep, but this is my first time ever actually interacting with my own story on Reddit. To be honest, I question the validity of a lot of the stories I hear, so this is my effort to share a true experience of mine. This happened to me a few months ago near my hometown. For a little info, I'm a 20-year-old male living in a pretty rural area in Virginia. My best friend and I occasionally drive to a park just a few minutes from both of our houses to play the disc golf course at the park. For those of you that don't know, and I don't blame you, what disc golf is, it's basically just golf but with frisbees. Anyway, this park is a couple miles down a back road off of the main road of our area. There is a pretty long gravel driveway that leads into the park, so there's really only one way in or out. We pulled into the parking lot and started getting warmed up with a couple of beers, as we were the only car in the parking lot. I know I shouldn't drink and drive, don't lecture me, Obi-Wan. Anyway, as we are sitting in the car, we see another car pull in the lot, and it just starts slowly circling around, essentially just inching around the parking lot. Inside the car, my friend and I see an older man with a large white beard just staring at us and smiling. My friend and I, always trying to make a good time, just start making fun of the guy amongst ourselves. That was until he parked his car in the driveway of the park, essentially blocking us in. We shrugged it off and decided to go warm up on the practice hole of the course. To get there, we had to walk across the driveway, past his car. As we approached the side of his car, we could see his feet on the ground on the other side of the car, kind of just standing there. As he came into view, he seemed to be messing with something. He said, "Oh, you boys caught me in the act." Confused, but still determined to play some disc golf that day, we kind of chuckled and just gave him the ordinary, "Hey, how's it going?" and kept walking. After a few minutes on the practice hole, he approached us with a couple of dirty, old-looking frisbees in hand. He started chatting with us. To be honest, I can't even really remember what he said, but my friend and I immediately got very bad vibes from this guy. So, we entered the woods where the first hole begins. There are 18 holes on the course, all looping through the woods on a trail. We quickly throw our first shots, not caring at all how accurate they were. We just wanted to get away from this guy. We begin power walking through the woods, just trying to put some distance between us and this man. We turn around to see him about 100 or so yards onto the trail, walking towards us. However, he did not throw a frisbee. He was just marching towards us, staring. At this point, my friend and I looked at each other, and without a single word spoken, we started sprinting down the trail away from this man. We ran until our legs felt like jello and stopped at an opening in the trail that allowed us to see the driveway and parking lot of the place. We saw him exiting from where we entered the first hole. He never threw a frisbee and never finished a single hole on the course. When we bolted away, he simply turned around and walked back to his car. We watched from the wood line as he sat in his car for half an hour, just waiting. Eventually, he finally left. Needless to say, my friend and I were pretty terrified. Even though, if it came down to it, I'm confident we could take the guy. He was wearing a large coat in pretty warm weather. I don't know what he could have had in his jacket. So, we were taking no chances. Side note, my friend's mother had a run-in with a guy at that park years earlier who matched his description perfectly. That man was fully naked in the park, aimlessly wandering around. Before I got married, I used to share a house with my best friend, his wife, and his brother. I had the whole basement to myself, and the rest of them had the 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. One Saturday morning, my best friend comes down to the main floor, still pretty sleepy in his robe, and asks me if I heard a lady humming last night. I told him no, and asked for more details, because that isn't just a casual question, especially since he would have known if it was his wife doing the humming. But he just kind of changes the subject, still groggy from sleep. Cut to Saturday night. I'm trying to sleep in that cold basement, tossing and turning. Eventually, I fell asleep, but something wakes me up around 2:30 a.m. What is it? Of course, very clearly, it's a woman humming from what sounds like the main floor. There's a vent that helps sound travel from the main floor to the basement bedroom, so it's pretty clear. The woman sounds pretty happy, I'd say. It's a low hum, like a mom would do for her baby. Now I'm laying there debating if I should go check it out or not. Of course, I chicken out, because life isn't a movie and I'm not risking my life. Eventually, I'm able to fall asleep again. The next morning, I tell my friend that I actually did hear the humming last night. And he looks at me like he has no idea what I'm talking about. I was so upset, but he really had no memory of telling me that. That was around 4 years ago. I recently brought it up around him and his wife, and they were both shocked. It was like it was the first time they'd ever heard of it. We had some other weird stuff happen in that house, but luckily, we were just renting, so none of us were stuck with it. I once went to South Carolina, and something followed me home. All right, for context, I had a long-distance best friend who was graduating, and he invited me to see his graduation. He paid for my airfare and everything. Of course I said yes. I went to South Carolina, and we had a great time. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and after a week, I went back to my home in Florida. The day I got home, I was exhausted, so I went to sleep and was hit with night terrors. I thought it was just my brain handling stress, but I kept having the same dream every night for 2 weeks. In the dream, I had to fight an 11-foot-tall Wendigo to get to my mother and save her. This terrifying beast kept attacking me and my loved ones. Every time it killed me, I was revived in a different location, similar to dying in a video game. But every slash felt painfully real. Eventually, I would kill it and wake up. After 2 weeks from this dream, I was getting tired of this thing haunting my sleep, so I decided to just stay up and focus on my writing. It had been only a day without sleep, and I was writing in the kitchen like I always did. I was so immersed in my writing that I almost missed it. But I saw a dark shadow from the corner of my eye. I instinctively turned to look at it and was met by the same 11-foot-tall Wendigo staring at me in the middle of my kitchen. I immediately said, "You need to get the hell out of here." I watch it narrow its eyes before disappearing. I was freaked out, so I looked up some protection spells, and after some trial and error, I had made an herb mixture to ward it off. From that night on, I didn't hear or see anything else. It was a terrifying experience, though. Every time I live in this town, I am followed by this same spirit. Okay, so I was born in a small town in Tennessee. We lived there for 2 years before moving to Florida. After some time, we moved back to that small town. When I was 9 years old, we moved into this apartment complex. It wasn't very expensive, and it was on the lower income side of town. We moved into B8, and almost immediately, I got a bad feeling. For context, here's how the apartment looked. You would walk into the apartment and see the living room. To the left of the living room was the kitchen. In front of the living room was a hallway that led to the 2 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms. The bathrooms were positioned on either side of the hallway, and there were 2 rooms on one side of the hallway and 1 on the other. My mother, being the spiritual woman that she was, burned sage around the home with the open windows and put jars of salt in all of the windows. For a period of time, this was fine, and my bad feeling went away. It was about 2 months after we moved in that I began having vivid nightmares. I saw the house burning, people watching me while I slept, extreme sleep paralysis that I haven't had since being in that house, etc. I began seeing a little girl, not much younger than me, in period clothing standing in the corner of my room. Every night I saw her, I had these terrible night terrors. It got to the point that I was trying to stay up for as long as possible, or going to my mom and staying up with her until she inevitably sent me back to my room. While I saw this little girl, I was also seeing this large black mass in our hallway and kitchen. My mother saw the black mass too, but she didn't get a bad feeling from it. However, I always did. Eventually, I was tired of seeing this little girl, so I tried talking to her. I asked her why she was here, why she was tormenting me, and if she could just leave me alone. She never said anything. She just kept staring. I asked my mother what I should do, and she told me to just tell her to leave. So I tried that. Every time I saw this little girl, I told her that she needed to leave and that this is my room now. After a few weeks of this, she finally left me alone, and I was able to get some sleep. But then, we were still dealing with the black mass. It gave me weird vibes, but it never tried to harm us. Occasionally, I would have dreams that I was running away from it, but that was child's play compared to the night terrors that I'd been having. There would be some times when I was just hanging out in my room, and I would hear someone walking down the hallways. I would think it was my brother or uncle walking to the bathroom, but whenever I would look up to see them, I would either see nothing but a normal hallway, or I would see the head of the black mass peering around the doorway at me, and then dart away. It made me uncomfortable, but that's just what we dealt with for a couple of years. At 12 years old, we moved out of those apartments and moved to some different ones. I felt a weird presence, but never saw or heard anything. When I turned 13, we moved back to the old apartments. This time, we were at D15. This was closer to the road and far enough away from B8 that I thought things would be fine. But once again, we saw this shadow in our hallway. I knew it was the same one because the footsteps sounded the same, and it always did the same creepy head tilt when it looked at you. I got curious as to why this thing had followed us from one apartment to another, so I began looking at what the apartment was beforehand, and also the warehouse that was across the street, thinking that there might be something there. I found out that the warehouse had been a hospital for a period of time, back around the 60s and 70s, and the apartments were sleeping quarters for the workers. After a bit of time, it shut down and got sold from one owner to the next. It eventually was turned into apartments. To this day, I'm unsure, but I think that black mass was some kind of doctor who worked at the hospital. In 2016, my mother passed, and we didn't want to stay in the apartment anymore, so we moved to Florida. We lived there for 3 years, and not much happened, paranormal-wise. I turned 18 and decided to move back to the small town to do some personal growth. And as soon as I got back, I felt its presence. My sister and I moved into an apartment complex that was about 3 blocks away from the old one, and immediately after moving in, I got the same feeling as I did from both B8 and D15. This time, it stayed in the kitchen for the most part. There was also the spirit of a little blonde-haired boy who stayed on the stairs. My niece and nephew would play with him. I would see him from our TV screen. Sometimes, I would be sitting in the living room, which was my bedroom at the time, and I would look up to see him peering from between the banister. Sometimes we would hear footsteps pounding up and down the stairs, even if we were the only ones in the apartment and our next-door neighbors were out. Our next-door neighbor even asked if we had seen or heard anything weird. And when I told her, she just shrugged and said, "That's exactly what the old neighbor said. She was always knocking on the door asking if we heard anything." They never had any problems, but most of everyone who lived in our apartment saw something. Back to the black mass. So, my sister and I had a falling out, and the apartment became mine and my fiance's. The first night it became ours, Jay was out at work, and I was home alone. I was playing video games and was really into it, but I had remembered that I needed to replace my gauges so that my ears didn't close up. I got up and went to where I had them, and as I turned around to go back to the TV, I saw the same black mass walk out in front of the doorway. It saw that I saw it, and it ducked behind the wall. And then it peeked its head at me like it had done before. Frankly, I was terrified, so I called a couple of friends, and they came over and stayed with me until Jay got home. Eventually, we had to move, and we moved back down to Florida. It's been 7 months, but we haven't seen or heard anything regarding that black mass. I hope that it stays in that small town and away from us. Thank you to my patron, Lover of the Creeps. If you are also interested in becoming a patron, just go ahead and click on the link in the description. Thanks again for watching.